Hello, everyone. Hope you all had a great Monday. As for me, it was not all that bad. Or it was Monday. But Big Monday means time for spooky places. And this week we shall visit spooky places in Minnesota. And our first stop is Dead Man's Hill, Wilmore, Minnesota. Located on farmland outside Wilmore, Minnesota, is a place called Dead Man's Hill that has been haunted for many, many years, dating back to the era before the Civil War. At that time, there were several places in Minnesota associated with the Underground Railroad, the secret system to help slaves escape from the southern states. Many of these slaves settled into northern regions of the county, while others, like the ones that passed through Minnesota, were on their way to Canada. It should be remembered that at this time, while the states in the northern were considered free states and no slavery was practiced there, it was still legal for bounty hunters and slave traders to pursue escaped slaves in these states. If a slave who was considered the property of a southern owner escaped in a free state, he could still be found brought back to his owner in the south. Such were the laws at that time that a ghost came to haunt Dead Man's Hill. Located on the farm outside of Wilmore was an American elm tree that marked the grave of a runaway slave who had died on the farm. The slave had made it as far north as Minnesota when he was captured by a bounty hunter who had probably been promised a handsome reward for the return of the runaway. The slave was chained to a fence post for the night, but somehow in the darkness he managed to pull the post from the ground and again escape. The bounty hunter awoke, and the two then fought until the slave beheaded his captor with the man's own sword. The next morning, the family who lived on the farm were shocked to find the body of the slave near the front of their porch. Mortally wounded, he had managed to crawl to the house, dragging the fence post behind him. The family followed a blood trail to the top of a nearby hill and found the body of the bounty hunter. The bounty hunter was buried at the top of what became known as Dead Man's Hill, and the slave was buried near the house where the tree was planted. Short time later, two men met unexplained deaths on Dead Man's Hill. The first man killed was that of a sharecropper who lived on a nearby farm. The other man was hired by the farmer's widow. A short time later, both men were attacked and killed on the hill by an unknown suspect. One that had left a trail of footprints in the snow, and which, by the trail left behind, had been dragging something behind him. It looked as though it had been the size of a fence post. Deaths were blamed on the runaway slave's ghost, who was also said to be haunting the farmhouse where he had died. Items often disappeared from the house, only to return later, and occupants reported hearing the sound of the ghost on an almost nightly basis. Usually the sounds would start near the hill and continue up to the house. A moaning and dragging sound mixed with the sound of rattling chains. The ghost was never seen, only heard, and its presence remained a frightful one for many years. It is said that a strange thing still happened in the vicinity of the hill, but luckily no one else has met their deaths in the place, leaving some to wonder if the other two men that died may have had something to do with the slave's capture after all. We now move on to Four Paws Restaurant, St. Paul, Minnesota. House was built in 1870 by a man named Joseph Forepaugh for himself, his wife, and two daughters. His life in the house was far from happy, though. His business life was always successful, as he was the senior partner in the largest wholesale dry goods company in the Midwest. But for some reason, at the age of 58, Forepaugh committed suicide. His body was found in a nearby park with a bullet in his head and a gun still clenched in his hand. Some claimed that Forepaugh worried needlessly about his financial affairs, leading to his suicide. But others whispered that his death had more to do with an affair of the heart than money, and they may have been right. Upon learning of his death, one of the household maids, a young girl named Molly, also killed herself. She was found hung from the overhead light in an upstairs room. The other servants in the house believed that Molly and Forepaw had been having an affair, and the man killed himself, realizing that the two of them could never be together. Many believe that it may be Molly's ghost who has come back to haunt the place. Restaurant owner James Krakovich recalled a special event at the place where the servers wore 19th century period clothing as costumes. As a waitress was setting up for dinner, an unknown woman in the same type of clothing, although not a dress supplied by the costume company, walked down a nearby hallway and disappeared. Staff members also talked of unusual events that happened with the customers and other employees, like lights turning on and off in the basement, cold chills, strange noises, and of course, the ghost of Molly. And the last stop for this week, Holy Trinity Churchyard, Goodhue, Minnesota. A man named Tunis Parkin was the first to see the ghost. He was a town painter, a respected and upstanding young man, and he was walking past a graveyard one night on his way to his home of a young lady, and had been courting. As he approached the apple orchard beside the church, he froze with fear. He was being followed from the cemetery, and he caught a glimpse of his pursuer, a glowing apparition that was shrouded in mist. He walked quickly, but the ghost seemed to follow. Finally, Parkin broke into a run and didn't stop until he reached the home of the town marshal, T.W. Taylor. He hurriedly told the tale to the lawman. While the Taylor expressed some doubts, he went and investigated the churchyard, but found nothing to lead him to believe that the place was haunted. In the morning, every resident of Goodhue knew that Tunis Parker's ghost, most mere skeptical, saying that he had been spooked by a shadow, but many were taking no chance. Young ladies in town were told to not be escorted near the churchyard after dark. 2 weeks later, another man, Thomas McNamara, had his own encounter with the ghost. He was walking home from a dance and passing the orchard when the apparition appeared and approached him. He panicked and ran from the area. Tom Riley also met the ghost in the graveyard. He was walking along the edge of the cemetery when the pale form appeared among the tombstones. Riley ran all the way to the main street of town, yelling that he had seen the ghost, although some claimed that it had only been white cow owned by local farmer. Nearly every day brought new stories of encounters with the spirit, although some of them were easily explained away as nothing but high spirits and anxiety and just plain foolishness. Finally, S.W. Taylor decided to act. He was the man responsible for law and order in Goodhue, and he planned to settle the ghost business once and for all. His plan is a simple one. He and Tunis Parker would hide in the apple orchard and capture the ghost. Unknown to Taylor, as he and Parkin hid in the bushes, Parkin had also alerted all of his friends to the ambush, and they waited close by with all their guns they could muster together. Also waiting for the ghost to appear, the evening was dark and quiet. Taylor and Larkin sat quietly side by side in the trees. Nothing was happening and no ghost had appeared. A couple of hours had passed, and then suddenly a terrifying scream pierced the darkness. Taylor was ready. He sprang forward and grabbed the culprit. 2 apple tree branches that were scraping together and causing the wailing sound whenever the wind blew. Across the orchard, the ambush party also went into action. When they heard Marshal Taylor running through the trees, thinking he was the ghost, they attacked, but luckily no shots were fired. Finally, when dawn came, Taylor and his deputies gave up the search, finding nothing to make them believe that the churchyard was haunted. Apparently their efforts did have some effect, though. The ghost was never heard from again. Well, hope you all enjoyed the spooky places for this week, my friends. And wishing you all a spooky night.